The live letter for patch 7.4 is now in the rearview mirror. We've gotten a sneak peek as to where this story is going to go, and honestly, I'm hyped. I'm excited. I am almost, as they say, over the moon, because they aren't falling, seemingly, into a lot of the pitfalls and traps that I thought they could easily have fallen into, after all the momentum they've accrued with 7.2 and 7.3. In this video, I want to talk about what those pitfalls could have been, why I think 7.4 isn't falling into them, and why I'm looking forward to patch 7.4 for the main story. Hello, everybody. It's your boy Jmulls, and are we going to Treno?
Thank you all so much.
Since this was only the first live letter for 7.4, we only got a few screenshots. When we get to the second live letter, we'll get the full trailer and some more information overall. But it is in these screenshots that I think we can glean quite a few things, at least in terms of the direction this story is going to go, that gives me a lot of confidence for what this story is going to try to do, and also the overall storytelling and their pacing. Let me explain. One of the biggest pitfalls that I was fearing they could easily fall into was benching Sphene. Now hear me out. I think it's safe to say that Sphene has become quite a fan favorite character, especially with the stories of 7.2 and 7.3. And they just spent all this time, right after a story that was polarizing at best, ill-received at worst, when it comes to Dawntrail 7.0 and .1, you finally get something that a lot of people that actually play the story really enjoy, especially with the character of Sphene. And I think it would be bad form or just a mistake to immediately build up that character to get us to care about that character to begin with, and then bench them and sideline them and not really make use of them again after we've had all this development and all this story with that character. It is something that Final Fantasy XIV has done before to varying degrees of success. But I think right now, when we need that new face, we need that new blood in the story to make us care about the story moving forward, Sphene is that character. So I feel their decision to keep Sphene, at least in the story for 7.4, is the correct one. You got us to fall in love with this character. You gave her so much development and screen time in .2 and .3. Now make use of all that development. You've built up this character. Now allow that character to help guide the story going forward. Sometimes the play is to bench a character for a period of time. For instance, Zero and Golbez with the Endwalker patches, where we had an entire arc with those characters, and now we kind of put them on ice, as we have left the void for now, and probably down the line we will reintroduce those characters into the story, but we won't have to spend time developing their characters because we already have done that. Like I said, benching characters for a period of time can work. But for right now, with where the story is overall, in terms of fan reception, I think it's important to have a character that is a face moving forward that people want to see more of, and I think Sphene fits that bill. Especially with the revelation at the end of 7.3 that Calyx is still around, and he's actually part of a different group called Winterer. Well, the story of Calyx and Sphene are inherently intertwined, and I think both characters are better by having each other. Now, it could just be a bit of a bait out, and we only have Sphene for a little bit of time in this MSQ, or we only have it in like 7.4, and then we bench it. Like, they could go down that route. I just feel like if their ultimate goal was to bench Sphene moving forward, 7.3 was the, like, perfect opportunity to do so. You make her queen, you can say, okay, she has to stay in Alexandria now, she has to stay in Solution 9 and do a queenly business, whatever, we'll move on for something else. Keeping her in this story is a conscious decision, and that tells me they have something they want to do and tell with this character. However, I'm not even sure if Sphene is going to be the focal point of 7.4, because one of the other hunches that I had was that the story of Krile wasn't over. A lot of people, when it came to the 7.0 story in living memory with Krile, believe that to have been like her entire arc. Like, oh, that was the Krile arc that we've kind of been waiting for. Kind of disappointing that it's over now. To me, that always felt like what Square Enix loves to do when it comes to the story of Final Fantasy XIV, and that is, we'll introduce elements rather early on, but we'll pick these things back up down the line. That felt like what they were doing with Krile to me, and that the story we had in living memory was just to introduce those story elements for them to do something with them later on. I think we're starting that now. In fact, one of the 4 main screenshots for the MSQ of 7.4 was just a close-up on Krile. It could be a red herring, but I do think at some point we're going to have a larger story arc involving Krile.
Thank you all so much.
I think another one of the bigger pitfalls they could have fallen into was to have this awkward break in the story. What do I mean by this? I think it is fair to say for a lot of people, 7.2 and 7.3 were far more interesting and grabbed a lot more people's attention than 0.0 and 0.1. And while we definitely are starting a new narrative arc overall, I think it is important not to have this real big narrative break and to kind of continue a lot of these themes and motifs from the previous story of 0.2 and 0.3 into the next one. Have a sense of cohesion. I think by having characters in the story like Sphene again, that can go a long way. But also, the location we're seemingly going to in 7.4. Now, this one's rather interesting because we do not have confirmation on it, but I am now of the opinion that the Halloween town-esque city we're going to in 7.4 is going to be called Treno. For those who don't know, Treno comes from Final Fantasy IX. Yeah, big surprise in Dawn Trail, right? And it's known as the Dark City. And a lot of the aesthetics when it comes to the architecture that we've seen, even in these few screenshots for this new location in 7.4, that Yoshi P deliberately called out, by the way, according to the Final Fantasy XIV Reddit Discord translation, link in the description down below to that, he said it wasn't living memory. Actually, he said it looks like living memory. I don't think so. Same thing. It's pretty much him telling us it's not living memory. I think this city is Treno. And I think one of the elements of 7.2 and 0.3 that was so much better for me as a player of the game and consumer of this story was the darker tone and atmosphere that 7.2 and 0.3 had over 0.0 and 0.1. It's not to say that 0.0 and 0.1 didn't have darker elements to it, it's just that 0.2 and 0.3 really leaned in that direction. And I think doing something with the Dark City of Treno, in the context of the story going on right now for Final Fantasy XIV, it can be an interesting way to hook the player if the story continues this darker atmosphere. I am a big fan when Final Fantasy XIV gets really dark with its narrative. And it doesn't particularly surprise me that we're exploring more of something at least pertaining almost certainly to the 9th, since I am of the opinion that this big new narrative arc will eventually lead us shard hopping. So exploring more of the 9th itself makes a lot of sense to me. I've said this before and I'll say it again, I think what they're trying to do is develop a new crew for us, involving different people from a bunch of different shards. Sphene for the 9th, Gaia and Reen for the 1st, and then Golbez and Zero for the Void. And I imagine if we're introduced to even more shards down the line, we'll get more characters to kind of fulfill this like party member role, and then at some point, probably near the climax of this arc, we'll bring them all together to form a new group. That's kind of what I'm thinking is going to happen. And when you look at the group that we actually have in 7.4, a lot of those characters specifically lend themselves to a story involving shards. We have Grahatia, he was the Crystal Exarch, I mean, come on. Krile's parents were linked to the 9th. And we also have Y'shtola, who we've been waiting for a couple of patches at this point to tell us what's going on with the key to interdimensional travel. And we also have Sphene in tow. It's like, this is the group that we were going to have if the story does involve shard hopping at some point, or exploring other shards. Like, this would be the group. And it feels to me like they're being very blatant about it. And like, again, it could be a red herring, or it could just be Final Fantasy XIV doing what I think they should. And that is going the obvious path here, because this is very interesting right now. 7.2 and 0.3 were very interesting stories by themselves. Continue a lot of those themes and motifs and those story elements and explore them even more here that were kind of relegated to a backseat role as we were dealing with Calyx and the people of Solution 9. Yoshi P has said before, 7.4 may end up being a little bit slower because it is supposed to start this new narrative arc. I imagine it's going to be a lot of build up and setup, but from what we've seen, that thematic hook could be very interesting, especially if this story acts as a natural progression after 7.3, which, judging from the people that are there, looks to be the case to me.
Thank you all so much.
I think if 7.4 is able to maintain the quality of the storytelling that we had in 0.2 and 0.3, experiment more with trying to implement new gameplay mechanisms into the actual storytelling experience so it's not just a bunch of cutscenes back to back to back, but do it in a more interesting way than they did in 7.3. It's like, I like the puzzles there, don't get me wrong, but I mainly like them for simply existing, not necessarily because they were the most interesting gameplay tidbits of all time. If they can continue continue working on refining that element to try and break up the flow with more interesting gameplay that can also further the narrative, I think that can go a long way. There's a lot of ifs when it comes to 7.4. We don't know. Again, we only have a few screenshots here, but I like to yap, and I think one of the big reasons I'm looking forward to 7.4 is because of the quality of 0.2 and 0.3. Like, if we didn't have those patches, I would be more pessimistic about what they're doing in the future, but those patches won me back over story-wise. And when they showcase, hey, those directions you were kind of nervous that we might go after the events of 7.3, well, seemingly we're not doing that. That gives me even more optimism. I wanted Sphene to continue to be an important element of the story, not just so I can farm thumbnails, right? Like, don't get me wrong, we'll be doing that as well. But besides that, one of my biggest pet peeves in stories is when you develop a character, make us care about that character, and then immediately either kill them off or sideline them. And the fact they're at least not doing that for now makes me more interested in what's going on. The fact that our party is Krile, Graha, and Y'shtola, which lends itself that the direction the story is going in is a direction that I am interested in with shard hopping and all that. Cool. I love FF9. I would love to go to Treno in Final Fantasy XIV. That appeals to me specifically. I love the darker vibes that we had in 0.2 and 0.3. And the fact that 7.4 is seemingly like leaning even more in that direction, I'm all in favor of. I mean, hell, look at the dungeon called Mistwake. It's like, yeah, it's going to be just a Final Fantasy XIV dungeon in all likelihood, but still aesthetically, it looks really dang cool. This like darkened train station has a really cool tense vibe about it, and then it like transitions us into what I imagine is Treno with this really cool digitized skybox up above everything. It just looks awesome. And then the actual trial itself is Doom Train, which I learned is apparently from Final Fantasy VIII. Just a part of Final Fantasy VIII that I haven't gotten to yet. But even then, fighting another train looks really sick. And while it is a design from a previous Final Fantasy game, some of my favorite creature designs in Final Fantasy XIV are the really dark, almost like flesh horror ones, and that is kind of exactly what Doom Train is here. Just this almost horrified, grotesque face slapped onto a giant train, and we get to fight it. Like, that's a really cool vibe. Yeah, I'm all on board with this. Take me on a ride, not just on the train, but take me on a ride when it comes to this story. I am very much optimistic.
Thank you all so much.
Mechanically, and when it comes to the game state, I think Final Fantasy XIV has a lot to improve on that we won't really see until later on, probably with like 8.0. However, when it comes to the story, I'm all the way back in, baby. I'm 10 toes in this. I am interested in where we're going. I am interested in finding out more about the characters we're with. I'm glad we still have Sphene. What appears to be Treno looks awesome. I want to find out more about Calyx and Winter and that Ascian. I imagine we probably will at some point in the future, probably in this patch. Good stuff all around for me, but here's where you come in. Leave a comment down below with your thoughts. How are you feeling about the story right now and the possible directions this could go in? And what is it about the story that you would still like to see them do to get you to be even more interested in what's going on? I would love to hear your thoughts. Hear your opinions and hear your perspectives. For me, it's kind of just like continuing what they're doing. Continue to tell a cohesive narrative that flows from one arc to the next, and continue to introduce new characters for us to fall in love with so we don't always have to rely on just a bunch of scions. I love the scions, don't get me wrong, but I do think we need new blood. And I think what they're doing right now is continuing to develop Sphene as a character. Aces in my book. And if you enjoyed the video, please, while you're down there, leave a like and subscribe. It really helps the channel out and helps support future content, and I greatly appreciate it. And if you want to hear my overview of patch 7.4 and everything, or at least most of what they talked about in the live letter, and you want to be up to date and up to speed, not the streamer, you should check out this video right here for more. Stay safe, everybody. Have a great day, and I'll see you all next time. Bye-bye, everybody. Until we meet again.